Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we step into a Paris that most history books only whisper about. Not the glittering Eiffel Tower, not the champagne laughter of the Roaring Twenties, but the quiet stairwells, the silver powder boxes hidden in silk handbags, the shadow cafés of Montparnasse, where genius and illusion drifted together in the smoke. In this episode of the Heroin Craze of 1920s Paris, boring history for sleep, we'll journey through the fog of post-war Paris, the rise of Coco among high society, the underground networks that moved like clockwork through the docks at night, the tragic fall of artists chasing inspiration through surrealism and drugs, and the silent police raids that slowly reshaped the city. This is 1920s Paris history told softly, a calm history narration woven with noir atmosphere, human vulnerability, and the end of the Roaring Twenties as Paris wakes into the uncertain 1930s. It's not a loud crime story, it's a sleep meditation history experience. A reflective walk through glamour, shadow, art, addiction, and awakening. Because sometimes the most powerful chapters of history are the ones that unfold quietly, like fog lifting from the Seine at dawn. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes. Imagine the cobblestones still wet from rain, a distant jazz melody fading into the night, and Paris breathing slowly as another story begins. So Paris in the 1920s was not as loud as you might imagine. Behind the glow of the Eiffel Tower and the shimmering cafés along the Seine, there were narrow streets where the air clung to the lungs like damp velvet, and silence pressed gently against the skin. It was a silence that did not scream, did not demand attention, but lingered like a memory that refused to fade. In this sleep story history, we step softly into 1920s Paris history, not to chase scandal or spectacle, but to feel the fragile atmosphere of post-war Paris, where something invisible drifted through Montmartre like morning fog. The war had ended, yet the city did not celebrate with the joy of rebirth. Instead, it exhaled slowly, as if unsure whether it was safe to breathe again. The cobblestones were still wet from an evening drizzle, and the sound of leather shoes tapping against stone echoed longer than it should have, stretching into alleyways where gas lamps flickered with a hesitant glow. There was a faint scent of old tobacco curling from cafe doors that never fully closed, mingling with the metallic trace of rainwater resting in the gutters. If you stood very still, you could almost taste the air, a quiet blend of coal smoke, stale perfume, and something else more difficult to name. Loss has a scent. It is subtle, like paper left too long in a drawer, like flowers that once bloomed brightly, but now lean toward the earth. The Great War had taken sons, brothers, lovers, and when the guns fell silent, Paris was left with an emptiness that could not be filled by jazz alone. In Montmartre, artists returned to their canvases, writers to their notebooks, dancers to dim stages, but beneath their movements there was a shared awareness that something fundamental had shifted. The laughter in cafes carried a delicate tremor, as though joy had become a performance rather than a certainty. This was the beginning of the heroin craze of 1920s Paris, though at first it did not look like a craze at all. It looked like fatigue. It looked like men staring too long into their glasses, like women pressing gloved fingers against temples that ached without visible cause. It looked like doctors prescribing relief for nerves that would not settle. In the quiet apartments overlooking the hills of Montmartre, curtains remained half-drawn, allowing only filtered light to enter rooms heavy with thought. The fog rolled in most evenings, soft and persistent, wrapping rooftops in a pale veil. It blurred the edges of buildings, softened church spires, and turned familiar streets into muted corridors of shadow. Under that fog, footsteps sounded distant, as if everyone were walking through memory rather than through time. The post-war Paris atmosphere was not one of explosive despair, but of slow, drifting melancholy. People did not speak openly about what they felt. Instead, they carried it in the way they paused before answering a question, in the way their shoulders curved slightly inward, in the way silence often lasted a breath too long. Even the river seemed quieter, sliding past its banks without the restless sparkle of earlier decades. In this gentle exploration of 1920s Paris history, it is important to understand that the city was not falling apart, it was searching for balance. And when balance feels impossible, humans reach for softness, for numbness, for anything that smooths the sharp corners of memory. In Montmartre, that search began subtly, almost invisibly, in conversations whispered over absinthe glasses, in medical cabinets stocked with ampules intended for pain, in a culture that believed modern chemistry could soothe the invisible wounds of modern life. But for now, as we breathe in the damp air and listen to distant footsteps fading into fog, let us remain here in the quiet before the storm, in the stillness where loss hangs gently in the air, and the city waits, uncertain yet hopeful, beneath a sky the color of fading silver. If you continue walking uphill through Montmartre, past the small bakeries that open before sunrise and the quiet studios where paint still lingers in the air, you begin to sense that 1920s Paris history was written not only in newspapers and grand boulevards, but in the softer spaces between conversations. The post-war Paris atmosphere did not erupt in visible chaos. Instead, it settled into people's bones. It appeared in the way a cafe waiter paused an extra second before setting down a porcelain cup, as though listening for something that no longer existed. It drifted through the narrow stairwells of apartment buildings, where each footstep echoed gently, then disappeared into thick wooden doors. Even the church bells from Sacré-Cœur seemed to ring with a restrained melancholy, their sound dissolving into the damp air as if unwilling to travel too far. In this sleep story history, we are not rushing towards scandal or headlines. We are resting inside the texture of the city itself. The fog returns each evening, not dramatically, but faithfully. It wraps around the street lamps, creating halos of pale gold that shimmer against the gray. Beneath those lamps, figures move slowly, collars turned upward, hats pulled low. The scent of rain mixes with something medicinal now, faint but present. Pharmacies along Boulevard de Clichy glow softly behind glass windows, their shelves lined with bottles that promise relief. Relief from nerves, relief from insomnia, relief from the invisible tremor that lingers long after loud events have passed. Doctors of the time believed deeply in modern science. Morphine had already been used widely during the war, and in the years that followed, derivatives such as heroin were considered refined, almost elegant solutions to pain. The word itself carried none of the darkness it would later acquire. It sounded clinical, controlled, progressive. In the post-war Paris atmosphere, progress felt comforting, chemistry felt precise, and precision felt safer than memory. Imagine a small consulting room, walls painted in muted cream, a brass lamp casting steady light over a wooden desk. A patient sits quietly, gloved hands folded in their lap. They do not describe trauma in dramatic terms. They speak instead of exhaustion, of restless nights, of a chest that feels heavy for no clear reason. The doctor listens, nods, writes a prescription in careful ink. Outside, the cobblestones are still wet, and a carriage rolls by with a soft, rhythmic clatter. The city does not notice this small exchange. It happens in dozens of rooms across Montmartre, across Paris. And so, gently, without announcement, the heroin craze of 1920s Paris begins to take root, not in crime dens or shadowy conspiracies, but in ordinary spaces filled with quiet longing for ease. In cafés, artists speak of liberation, of breaking traditions, of reinventing form. Yet beneath their ambition, there is fatigue. You can hear it in the way laughter fades quickly, in the way cigarettes are lit one after another without pause. The air inside these cafés is thick, layered with smoke that clings to velvet curtains and wool coats. If you breathe deeply, you might detect a sweetness beneath the tobacco, subtle and almost comforting. The human mind is drawn toward what softens its edges. In 1920s Paris history, this softness was not yet understood as danger. It was seen as restoration. The fog outside seems to approve, blurring the outlines of consequence. Street musicians play slow melodies on accordions, their notes stretching thin across the square. Couples pass by without speaking, their footsteps synchronized, their thoughts distant. The city feels suspended between what it survived and what it will become. This is the delicate space where habits are formed, where relief turns into routine. And still, nothing appears alarming. There are no dramatic collapses in the streets, no sudden alarms. There is only the gradual normalization of a substance that promises quiet. In this sleep story history, we linger in that normalization. We observe how easily a society recovering from loss can accept something that dulls the sharpness of grief. The post-war Paris atmosphere was not reckless. It was tender, it was vulnerable. And vulnerability often seeks comfort in forms that seem harmless at first touch. As you listen, imagine the texture of a wool coat brushed by mist, the faint warmth of a cafe interior against chilled fingers, the taste of bitter coffee lingering on the tongue. Imagine how small choices accumulate, how a single prescription becomes two, then three, then a quiet dependency woven invisibly into daily life. The heroin craze of 1920s Paris does not begin with noise. It begins with a sigh. It begins with the soft belief that numbness can be temporary, that it can be managed, that it will remain under control. The fog of Montmartre watches silently, drifting along rooftops, settling into window frames, bearing witness without judgment. And in that gentle gray light, the city continues to move, unaware that beneath its calm exterior, something slow and irreversible is beginning to breathe. And so the fog remains, patient and unhurried, drifting along the rooftops of Montmartre, as if it understands that cities, like people, rarely collapse in a single moment. In 1920s Paris history, transformation moved quietly. It moved in the hush between piano notes in a dim cafe, in the soft scrape of a match striking against a box, in the almost imperceptible sigh of someone who no longer wished to feel too deeply. The post-war Paris atmosphere was not chaotic, it was suspended, suspended between memory and reinvention, between grief and glitter. Paris had always been a city of spectacle, yet during these early years after the Great War, spectacle felt thinner, like silk stretched too tightly over fragile bones. Walk again through the narrow streets beneath Sacré-Cœur. Notice how the early morning light does not burst across the sky, but seeps gently over the stone. The city wakes slowly. A bakery door opens with a muted creak. Warm bread meets the lingering dampness of the night air. Coal smoke rises faintly from chimneys. Somewhere a tram rattles past, metal wheels humming along the tracks with restrained rhythm. This is not a city in ruin. It is a city in recovery, and recovery is often quieter than suffering. In this sleep story history, we rest inside that quiet recovery. The heroin craze of 1920s Paris did not begin as rebellion. It began as remedy. It was framed as medical sophistication, as modern progress, as a refined answer to nerves unsettled by years that no one wished to describe aloud. Physicians wrote prescriptions with calm assurance. Pharmacists measured powders and liquids with careful hands. The substance passed through the city without drama, wrapped in the language of science and relief. And in the post-war Paris atmosphere, relief was precious. Montmartre had long been a refuge for artists and dreamers. Painters layered color onto canvas in rented studios where walls absorbed decades of cigarette smoke. Poets leaned over café tables, ink staining their fingertips as they searched for words that could capture something just beyond reach. Musicians filled night air with jazz newly imported from across the Atlantic, rhythms both restless and hypnotic. Yet beneath this creative pulse, there lingered a softness that bordered on fragility. Energy rose and fell quickly. Conversations glowed, then dimmed. The desire to escape the heaviness of memory became subtle, almost fashionable. There is a certain intimacy in shared numbness. When something eases the tremor beneath your ribs, even temporarily, it feels like companionship. In 1920s Paris history, that companionship began to weave itself through social circles quietly. It was not announced, it was implied. An offered vial here, a whispered recommendation there. The fog outside seemed to mirror this diffusion, spreading evenly, obscuring sharp edges, making consequences appear distant. If you listen closely in this sleep story history, you can hear how normal everything sounds. A spoon tapping gently against porcelain, laughter soft but brief, footsteps dissolving into mist. Nothing crashes, nothing shouts. That is how the heroin craze of 1920s Paris settled into the city's rhythm. It synchronized with exhaustion. It harmonized with the desire to smooth rough emotions. It promised control in a world that had proven unpredictable. And yet, beneath the calm, something subtle shifts. The body remembers what the mind tries to quiet. Tolerance grows invisibly. Relief shortens. The fog that once felt protective begins to feel enclosing. But in these earliest days, that awareness remains distant. The post-war Paris atmosphere continues to cradle the illusion of balance. Cafés remain full. Galleries open new exhibitions. Lovers stroll beneath dim street lamps, their silhouettes merging with vapor rising from the Seine. In the end, the fog of Montmartre is not merely weather, it is metaphor. It is the gentle veil that allowed a generation to step away from pain without confronting it directly. It is the softness that made chemistry feel like comfort, and comfort feel like necessity. As we close this first chapter of our journey into 1920s Paris history, breathe slowly and imagine the city suspended in pale gray light. The fog does not accuse, it does not warn, it simply lingers, wrapping rooftops and hearts alike in quiet ambiguity. And within that ambiguity, something small has begun, something born not from wickedness, but from longing. Let the rhythm of the cobblestones fade now. Let the scent of rain and tobacco drift gently through your thoughts. The city sleeps, unaware that beneath its calm exterior, a new dependency is quietly weaving itself into the fabric of modern life. Before it became a catastrophe, it was fashion. They called it Coco, and it rested delicately inside silver cases carried by elegant women whose gloves were softer than confession. In the continuation of our journey through 1920s Paris history, the fog of Montmartre does not lift. It simply thins as we step into brighter rooms, into chandeliers and mirrored halls where the post-war Paris atmosphere transforms itself into something glittering, almost defiant. This is not the street. This is not desperation in alleyways. This is Parisian high society 1920s, where silk whispers across marble floors and champagne rises in fragile golden spirals. And here, within laughter that rings too brightly, the history of drug use in 1920s Paris takes on a different face. Imagine entering a salon near the Champs-Élysées. The curtains are heavy velvet, drawn just enough to allow city light to soften the interior. Crystal glasses clink gently. A pianist plays something modern, syncopated, restless. Women in gowns of pearl and midnight blue lean close to one another, exchanging secrets that feel intimate but float lightly above consequence. A silver case opens with a quiet click. Inside, a fine white powder rests like freshly fallen snow. No one calls it heroin. That word feels too clinical, too harsh. Here, it is Coco. The name is playful, almost affectionate. It suggests perfume, elegance, modernity. It suggests something curated rather than dangerous. In this sleep story history, notice the contrast. Outside, cobblestones remain damp and fog still settles over rooftops. Inside, everything glows. Warmth replaces chill, laughter replaces echo. Yet the powder is the same. It does not change its nature simply because it is framed by silk gloves and diamond bracelets. This is one of the more unsettling, boring history facts. Luxury does not neutralize consequence, it only disguises it. In the history of drug use in 1920 society, substances often moved upward before they moved downward. They began as novelties of the privileged, symbols of daring, modern sophistication. In Parisian high society 1920s, there was a hunger for sensation. The war had stolen certainty. Wealth, for those who retained it, felt almost fragile, and fragility sometimes seeks intensity. Coco was offered not as escape from poverty, but as enhancement of pleasure. A sharper sparkle to conversation, a brighter edge to music, a deeper sense of being alive in rooms already overflowing with excess. There is something quietly tragic about that desire. When life feels both precious and precarious, people reach for amplification. They want to feel more, not less. The powder circulates gently from hand to hand. It is discreet, it is refined. It is never discussed openly in terms of dependency. Instead, it is woven into the rhythm of soirees and private gatherings. The history of drug use in 1920s Paris does not erupt in scandal at first. It glides, it glimmers, it aligns itself with fashion and art. Some whisper that it sharpens creativity. Others claim it softens nerves before a performance or a negotiation. In this post-war Paris atmosphere, control is everything. To appear composed is to appear powerful. Coco promises composure without visible strain. Listen carefully to the sounds of these rooms. Champagne corks release with soft pops. Silk brushes against polished wood. Perfume mingles with candle wax and faint traces of tobacco. Beneath these scents, barely noticeable, there is the sterile sweetness of processed powder. It lingers in the air just long enough to blur judgment. And still, No one calls it danger. They call it modern. They call it chic. They call it a small indulgence in a city determined to reclaim joy. This is the dark side of luxury that history often hides beneath glamour. In Parisian high society 1920s, decline did not look like collapse. It looked like refinement. It looked like silver cases closing with satisfied clicks. It looked like smiles that lasted a fraction too long. And in our gentle exploration of 1920s Paris history, we remain with that image, chandeliers glowing, music flowing, and in the palm of a gloved hand, a thin line of white that seems almost innocent beneath the light. The silver case closes with a soft metallic sigh, and the music resumes as though nothing significant has happened. That is how refinement protects illusion. In our continuing passage through 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze does not storm the city gates. It drifts through private drawing rooms and settles gently on polished surfaces. Within Parisian high society 1920s, excess is curated. Even indulgence is choreographed, and so Coco, the white powder of elegance, becomes part of the evening ritual as naturally as champagne poured into tall, narrow glasses. The room feels warmer now. Candlelight flickers against gilded frames. Conversations shimmer with cleverness. A poet recites a few lines too quickly, eyes bright, hands animated. A financier laughs louder than necessary, his confidence slightly sharpened. A singer preparing for performance breathes deeply and assures herself that this small white line will steady her voice. In the history of drug use in 1920s Europe, substances were often framed as tools of enhancement, not escape. That subtle distinction matters. To escape suggests weakness. To enhance suggests mastery. Coco was never described as surrender. It was described as control. And yet, control is fragile. Beneath the silk and satin, beneath the polished etiquette of Parisian high society 1920s, there exists the same human nervous system that trembled in trenches and hospital wards only a few years before. Trauma does not dissolve simply because one changes wardrobe. The post-war Paris atmosphere may glow with confidence, but memory remains cellular. It lingers in heartbeat patterns, in restless sleep, in sudden waves of unexplained fatigue. Coco offers clarity at first, a lifted fog within the mind, a moment of crisp perception, as if the world's edges have been outlined in ink. For individuals accustomed to privilege, such precision feels empowering. Notice how easily the powder aligns itself with aesthetics. It is white, immaculate, almost decorative. It mirrors the pearls at a woman's throat, the powdered finish on a vanity table, the grand marble of a pale marble staircase. In boring history facts rarely emphasized in textbooks, addiction does not always begin in darkness. Sometimes it begins in beauty. The history of drug use in 1920s Paris reveals how modern chemistry was marketed as progress, how refinement shielded substances from moral scrutiny. If it belonged in salons rather than alleyways, it seemed civilized. The evening stretches. Music grows faster. Laughter becomes layered, overlapping. The silver cases reopen discreetly, passed beneath tables or behind fans. No one imagines themselves as vulnerable. Wealth, after all, carries the illusion of insulation. Doctors are accessible, reputations are guarded, scandal can be managed. Within Parisian high society 1920s, risk feels negotiable. But physiology does not negotiate. The body responds with quiet loyalty to what it is given repeatedly. Tolerance builds in silence. Step outside the salon for a moment. The night air greets you with cool dampness. The city beyond the party remains subdued. A carriage wheel splashes through shallow water. A lone lamplighter adjusts a flame. The contrast between interior brilliance and exterior stillness feels almost cinematic. Yet both spaces belong to the same 1920s Paris history. The heroin craze does not distinguish between silk and wool. It moves wherever human longing resides. Inside again, someone leans closer to whisper, their breath faintly sweetened by champagne and something more sterile. Eyes shine with artificial vitality. Words flow with effortless charm. In this sleep story history, there is no shouting, no dramatic collapse across marble floors. Instead, there is a gradual recalibration of what feels normal. What once seemed daring becomes expected. What once required courage becomes habit. Coco, the elite's powder, shifts from accessory to necessity almost invisibly. The dark side of luxury is not loud. It is patient. It allows indulgence to masquerade as sophistication. And as this chapter of our 1920s Paris history unfolds, the powder remains nestled in silver, glimmering beneath chandelier light, appearing harmless in rooms designed to disguise imperfection. But beneath elegance, a quiet dependency has begun to pulse, steady, understated, and increasingly woven into the rhythm of the night. There is a moment in every era when indulgence still feels innocent. In 1920s Paris history, that moment glowed beneath chandeliers and shimmered across silk gowns before anyone realized the cost. Coco remained small, measured, contained. It fit neatly within silver cases, within laughter, within the illusion that refinement could shield the body from consequence. In Parisian high society 1920s, excess did not look desperate. It looked exquisite. It looked curated. And that is precisely why it was so easy to love. As the evenings deepened, so too did the emotional undercurrent beneath the glitter. Beneath the diamonds and tailored tuxedos, beneath the polite applause and flirtatious glances, there lived a generation still negotiating what it meant to survive. The post-war Paris atmosphere shimmered with resilience, yet resilience often carries exhaustion in its shadow. People smiled because they were expected to. They hosted because it signaled stability. They dressed magnificently because beauty felt like defiance against sorrow. Coco slipped quietly into this choreography, offering a brief lift in a world still subtly heavy. In the history of drug use in 1920s Europe, substances rarely entered society labeled as catastrophe. They arrived dressed as solutions. Coco was no exception. It softened the invisible tremor in hands that once trembled for other reasons. It sharpened conversation for minds desperate to feel brilliant again. It quieted anxieties that wealth could not erase. And because it operated without immediate visible ruin, it earned trust. That trust is perhaps one of the more haunting, boring history facts. Dependency often begins with confidence. Imagine a young heiress leaning against a balcony overlooking the Seine. Her gown glimmers in moonlight. Below, the river moves in steady silence. She feels alive, electrified, convinced that she is part of something modern and extraordinary. The powder has made her thoughts feel luminous, as though every idea carries weight and elegance. She does not feel endangered, she feels expanded. That emotional expansion is seductive. It blurs the boundary between enhancement and erosion. Inside the salon, the party continues. Someone plays a faster tune. A couple disappears into a side room, laughter trailing behind them like perfume. Silver cases open again and again, each time with less ceremony. The body, however, begins to whisper in ways the mind ignores. Relief lasts slightly shorter. The craving for repetition grows almost imperceptibly. In Parisian high society 1920s, such shifts are dismissed as indulgent enthusiasm. After all, modern life is meant to be intense. That was the promise of the Roaring Twenties. But intensity is not the same as vitality. This is where the dark side of luxury begins to surface, not in scandalous collapse, but in quiet imbalance. In 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze threads itself through privilege without noise. It is hidden behind velvet curtains and polite applause. It is sustained by the belief that wealth equals immunity. Yet chemistry does not discriminate. Silk does not soften its impact. Diamonds do not slow its grip. If you listen carefully in this sleep story history, you can almost hear the emotional shift beneath the music. There is a faint urgency in certain voices, a slight restlessness in eyes that once appeared serene. Coco no longer feels like a novelty, it feels like anticipation. And anticipation, when repeated often enough, becomes dependence. The post-war Paris atmosphere, once characterized by cautious recovery, now carries a subtle pulse of excess that cannot entirely mask vulnerability. Still, the chandeliers shine. Still, champagne flows. Still, the silver cases close with that same delicate click. History rarely announces its turning points in dramatic fashion. Instead, it hums beneath elegance, beneath laughter, beneath the gentle brush of silk across marble floors. And as we gently close this part of our exploration into the history of drug use in 1920s Paris, we do not judge those figures drifting through candlelit rooms. We recognize their humanity, their longing to feel more alive, their fear of feeling too much. Coco, the elite's powder, was never merely about decadence. It was about the fragile heart of a city that wanted to forget without admitting it was trying to forget. It was about beauty layered over grief. It was about the seductive promise that sophistication could anesthetize memory. And beneath the glittering skyline of Paris, beneath the quiet flow of the Seine, that promise settled in silk-lined pockets and trembling hands, waiting patiently for the moment when fashion would no longer be enough to disguise the cost. There are cafés in Paris you will not find on a map, places where the customers do not order coffee, they order forgetting. As the chandeliers of high society dim behind us and the silver cases close softly in silk-lined pockets, we descend again into the quieter arteries of 1920s Paris history, where glamour fades into shadow and the post-war Paris atmosphere thickens into something more intimate, more vulnerable. In the official record of Parisian cafés history, names like Le Dôme and La Rotonde shine brightly, remembered as gathering places for artists, intellectuals, and the restless spirits of the lost generation writers. Tourists today sit beneath striped awnings, unaware that beneath polished tables and neatly printed menus once lived a parallel rhythm, one less luminous and more fragile. In underground Paris 1920s, the cafes were smaller, the ceilings lower, the windows clouded not by fog alone, but by years of smoke clinging stubbornly to glass. The air felt heavier here. It carried the scent of burnt coffee grounds, damp wool coats, cheap tobacco, and something faintly medicinal, almost sweet. Conversations unfolded in murmurs rather than declarations. Laughter, when it appeared, was brief and brittle, like glass tapped lightly with a spoon. In this sleep story history, let your imagination slow down and settle into one of those narrow rooms. The wooden tables are scarred by years of elbows and ink stains. The floorboards creak gently beneath careful footsteps. At a corner table sits a young painter with dark, searching eyes. His name, whispered across Europe, is Pablo Picasso. He does not perform brilliance. He sits quietly, observing the room, absorbing the post-war Paris atmosphere into the silence between sips. Across the cafe, a tall American writer bends over a notebook, jaw set in concentration. Ernest Hemingway, not yet a legend, but already carrying the weight of the trenches in his posture, writes with urgency as though words alone might anchor him to something solid. These figures belong to the documented history of Parisian cafes' history, yet the full texture of their surroundings often remains unspoken. The cafes were not only sites of artistic awakening, they were sanctuaries for those who did not wish to feel too sharply. In the underground Paris 1920s scene, Coco drifted from high society salons into dimmer corners. It was no longer presented in ornate silver cases, but wrapped discreetly in folded paper or passed beneath tables with subtle glances. Here, it did not symbolize fashion, it symbolized relief. The lost generation writers, many of whom carried psychological scars from war and displacement, were drawn to spaces where conversation was deep but dimly lit. The powder offered a softening of edges, a slight hush over intrusive memory. In boring history facts rarely detailed in travel brochures, the celebrated cafes of Montparnasse contained both brilliance and quiet dependency. Listen carefully to the room. Cups rest on saucers with a muted click. A chair scrapes gently against wood. Outside, carriage wheels move through wet streets, the sound softened by night air. Inside, smoke curls upward in pale ribbons, blurring the outlines of faces. The post-war Paris atmosphere lingers in every inhale. No one announces despair. No one proclaims addiction. Instead, there is a shared understanding that the world has shifted and that certain substances make that shift easier to bear. In our exploration of 1920s Paris history, this is the secret history layered beneath the postcard image. Visitors today might walk past La Rotonda, admire its facade, and order an espresso without realizing that a century earlier, in the shadowed hours after midnight, some patrons sought not caffeine, but numbness. Underground Paris 1920s was not separate from the city. It was the city, simply viewed from a lower, more honest angle. And as we settle into this first part of the Shadow Cafes, we begin to sense how the heroin craze moved beyond luxury and into creative circles, not with violence, but with the quiet promise of forgetting. If you remain seated in that dim cafe a little longer, you begin to notice how time behaves differently here. In the official narrative of 1920s Paris history, cafes are remembered as places of brilliance where ideas were born and movements took shape. But in underground Paris 1920s, time stretches softly, almost protectively, around those who are trying not to feel too much. The lamps burn low, the smoke thickens, the world outside becomes distant, reduced to the faint rattle of wheels and the soft hiss of rain against stone. Inside, forgetting feels closer than ambition. In the layered fabric of Parisian cafés' history, Le Dôme and La Rotonde were indeed magnets for artists, philosophers, and the lost generation writers. Yet beyond their brighter corners were tables that did not appear in memoirs. At these tables, conversations grew slower, heavier. Picasso might glance up from a sketch and study the way light fractured through smoke, seeing in it both beauty and distortion. Hemingway might pause mid-sentence, staring into his glass, not because he lacked words, but because he felt too many of them pressing against memory. These are not accusations, they are acknowledgments of human fragility in a post-war Paris atmosphere that rewarded creative intensity while quietly exhausting those who carried it. Coco, in these shadow cafés, lost its elegance and gained intimacy. It was no longer displayed, it was shared with a nod, with a brief meeting of eyes that required no explanation. The history of drug use in 1920s creative circles reveals that substances often migrate toward places where emotion runs deep. Artists, after all, are trained to feel sharply, and sharpness in a world still echoing with war can be unbearable. The powder softened that edge. It lowered the volume of intrusive memory. It allowed the night to feel manageable. Listen to the subtle sounds around you. A match flares briefly, illuminating a face drawn with fatigue. A spoon stirs coffee that has long since gone cold. A chair shifts as someone leans closer to confide in a friend. Outside, the city continues its quiet breathing, unaware that inside these cafés, a different rhythm pulses, one shaped by longing for relief rather than hunger for fame. In this sleep story history, we do not sensationalize these moments. We sit with them gently. We recognize that beneath artistic legend lies vulnerability. One of the more revealing, boring history facts is that many of the cafés celebrated today were porous spaces. The line between public brilliance and private struggle was thin. A patron might debate philosophy under bright afternoon light, and hours later return under cover of night seeking solace in something less visible. Underground Paris 1920s was not separate from Montparnasse glamour. It was its underside, its quieter reflection. And the heroin craze threaded itself through that reflection, quietly, almost tenderly. There is something deeply human in the desire to dull pain without surrendering identity. The lost generation writers did not see themselves as addicts or casualties. They saw themselves as thinkers navigating an uncertain world. Coco, for them and for many others, seemed like a tool rather than a trap. It promised temporary equilibrium. It promised that the tremor in the chest would ease, that sleep might come more easily after midnight conversations ended. Yet the body keeps its own ledger. Relief repeated becomes expectation. Expectation becomes need. And in these shadow cafés, where history rarely lingers in tourist imagination, that need began to weave itself into daily ritual. The post-war Paris atmosphere, once characterized by cautious hope, now carried an undercurrent of quiet dependency. Still, the cafés remained open. Still, ideas flowed. Still, the illusion of control persisted. And as we continue deeper into this secret chapter of 1920s Paris history, we begin to sense that the real story of underground Paris 1920s is not scandal or spectacle, but the soft, aching human desire to forget without disappearing. Stay a little longer in that dim corner, where the lamp hums faintly and the smoke moves like a second curtain across the room. In the surface version of 1920s Paris history, cafes are luminous stages. But in underground Paris 1920s, they were also confessionals without priests, sanctuaries without sermons. Here, no one said the word addiction. No one framed their evenings as decline. They spoke of inspiration, of fatigue, of needing something to steady the pulse. And beneath those gentler phrases, the heroin craze found quiet shelter. In the official memory of Parisian cafes history, we celebrate conversations that reshaped literature and art. We imagine the lost generation writers arguing passionately about form and meaning, Picasso bending light into abstraction, Hemingway chiseling sentences into something spare and indestructible. Yet what is less often described is the emotional undertow beneath those conversations. The post-war Paris atmosphere was saturated with unspoken grief. Victory had arrived, yes, but so had absence. So had silence at dinner tables where someone no longer sat. In these shadow cafes, that absence felt closer than applause. Coco, now woven into the underground Paris 1920s rhythm, did not roar its presence. It dissolved into gestures. A folded paper passed across wood grain, a momentary retreat to the washroom, a return to the table with eyes slightly brighter, shoulders slightly looser. The change was subtle enough to feel harmless. And that subtlety is one of the most revealing, boring history facts about the history of drug use in 1920s Europe. Dependency rarely announces itself in grand gestures. It enters like smoke, filling available space until it becomes the air itself. Listen to the emotional temperature of the room. A writer laughs, but there is a flicker of distance behind it. A painter studies his hands as though they belong to someone else. A young expatriate, newly arrived and eager to belong among the lost generation writers, watches carefully, mimicking posture and cadence, hoping to absorb not only talent, but resilience. The cafe offers community, it offers belonging, and for a generation displaced by war and migration, belonging is precious. Coco seems to strengthen that bond, smoothing social friction, easing self-doubt. But what binds can also entangle. If you were to walk past La Rotonda today, perhaps you would notice only the warm glow and the hum of conversation. Few visitors sense the secret history layered beneath the paint and polish. In 1920s Paris history, underground Paris 1920s was never a separate district. It was an emotional layer beneath visible life. The heroin craze moved through that layer not as spectacle, but as atmosphere. It softened edges. It dampened sharp memory. It promised that creativity could burn brighter without consuming the soul. Yet the body keeps count. In these shadow cafes, nights began to blur. What once felt like choice began to feel like routine. The powder, once shared occasionally, became quietly expected, and with expectation came subtle fear. The fear of sitting alone with unfiltered thought, of feeling the full weight of memory when the music stopped and chairs scraped back into silence. The post-war Paris atmosphere, once cautiously rebuilding, now carried a tension between brilliance and exhaustion. There is something deeply moving about imagining these figures not as icons, but as people navigating fragile terrain. Picasso, Hemingway, unnamed painters and poets, they were not myths in those rooms. They were men and women with beating hearts, seeking meaning and sometimes seeking relief. In our sleep story history, we do not romanticize their struggle, nor do we condemn it. We sit beside it gently. We feel the humanity in their longing to forget just enough to continue creating. And so the shadow cafes of 1920s Paris history remain suspended in memory. They are not marked with plaques declaring their darker chapters. They exist in whispers, in the way smoke once clung to ceilings, in the way laughter sometimes faltered before fully forming. Underground Paris 1920s was a tapestry of brilliance and vulnerability woven together. The heroin craze did not extinguish creativity overnight. It threaded through it, quietly, almost invisibly, until fashion and forgetting became difficult to separate. As we close this chapter of the Shadow Cafés, imagine the room slowly emptying. Chairs return to their places. The last candle flickers and fades. Outside, Paris breathes cool night air. The river moves steadily beneath bridges that have seen centuries of triumph and sorrow. And somewhere within that breathing city, the desire to forget lingers. Not dramatic, not loud, but soft and persistent, like smoke that takes a long time to clear. She was the queen of Montparnasse, but her throne was built on cigarette smoke and fragile illusions that dissolved before dawn. As the shadow cafes empty and the last embers of conversation fade into the Paris night, our journey through 1920s Paris history narrows its focus from rooms to a single heartbeat. In the vast tapestry of Bohemian life Paris, there are many names, many faces, yet one figure continues to shimmer through art history's sleep story whispers, like a ghost wrapped in silk and defiance. Her name was Kiki de Montparnasse. In any brief Kiki de Montparnasse biography, you will find references to her as a muse, a model, a singer, a painter, a symbol of freedom in the post-war Paris atmosphere. But tonight, in this sleep story history, we step closer to the quiet hours between applause. We move beyond the photographs taken by Man Ray, beyond the laughter echoing through La Rotonde, and into the stillness of a small rented room where curtains remain drawn against the pale afternoon light. Her mornings begin in darkness, or rather, they begin when the rest of Paris is already deep into its day. She sleeps as sunlight travels across Montparnasse rooftops. The city hums outside her window, vendors calling softly, carriages rolling, cafe doors opening. But inside, the air is heavy with the lingering scent of last night's tobacco and perfume. On a small wooden table sits a glass half filled with water, lipstick faintly staining the rim. A silk dress lies draped over a chair like a memory not yet folded away. This is the quieter side of Bohemian life, Paris rarely romanticized. When she wakes, it is not with urgency. It is with a slow awareness of her body, of the ache in her temples, of the faint restlessness that hums beneath her ribs. In the official Kiki de Montparnasse biography, this restlessness is framed as artistic temperament, as wild energy suited for the avant-garde. But in the more intimate 1920s Paris history, it is something else too. It is the weight of expectation, the pressure of being seen not as a woman, but as an idea. By late afternoon, she prepares for evening. Powder touches her cheeks. Kohl outlines her eyes. She studies her reflection not out of vanity, but out of necessity. In the art history sleep story of Montparnasse, muses were both celebrated and consumed. They inspired canvases, yet rarely controlled their own narratives. As she steps into the twilight streets, the post-war Paris atmosphere greets her with a mix of admiration and hunger. Painters nod, writers lift their glasses, musicians shift in their seats. She is luminous, but luminosity is exhausting. Night falls fully, and Montparnasse awakens. In cafes, her laughter rings brightly. She poses in studios where cold air brushes her skin as she holds still for hours. The artist speaks softly around her, discussing light and form. She becomes shape and shadow, curve and contrast. In this Bohemian life Paris, she is both subject and spectacle. And somewhere between the posing and the singing, between the flirtation and the applause, the small folded paper appears. Coco, now no longer merely a fashion of salons or a whisper of shadow cafes, enters her world as companion. At first it feels like relief, a gentle smoothing of edges, a quieting of the tremor that comes from living always in public view. In the broader history of the heroin craze of 1920s Paris, such moments were common and rarely dramatic. The powder does not demand devotion, it offers softness. It promises that fatigue will fade and confidence will bloom brighter under gaslight. For someone living in constant performance, that promise feels almost merciful. And so her ordinary day, if it can be called ordinary, closes in the early hours of morning. The music slows, the streets empty. She returns to her small room as the first hint of dawn touches the sky. Removing her makeup, she studies her reflection again. Beneath the paint and the glamour is a woman still searching for solid ground. The throne of Montparnasse feels less stable in silence, and as she lies down to sleep while the city wakes once more, the line between muse and illusion grows thinner, carried gently by smoke and the faint, persistent whisper of escape. So, if you follow her into another evening, you begin to understand that her life was not chaos, but rhythm, a nocturnal rhythm woven into the broader fabric of 1920s Paris history, where Bohemian life Paris pulsed strongest after midnight. The cafes filled as offices emptied, the studios brightened as homes darkened, and Kiki moved through this reversal of time as though she belonged more to moonlight than to sun. In many versions of a Kiki de Montparnasse biography, her freedom is emphasized. She posed boldly, she sang loudly, she laughed without apology. Yet in this art history sleep story, we pause on the quieter in-between moments that biographies often skip. The waiting between poses, the silence before applause, the long walk home when admirers had drifted away and admiration dissolved into ordinary fatigue. It is in those moments that the emotional gravity of the post-war Paris atmosphere becomes visible. By night, she is radiant. In the studio, cold light spills across her shoulders as she stands motionless for hours. Painters adjust easels. Charcoal scratches softly against paper. They speak of composition and revolution, of breaking old forms. She listens, amused and distant at once. She is admired, desired, immortalized on canvas. But admiration is a peculiar weight. It asks a person to remain luminous even when the body is tired. And so, when the small folded paper appears again, it does not feel like corruption. It feels like permission to soften. The history of the heroin craze of 1920s Paris often focuses on statistics or scandal, yet within Bohemian life Paris, it was deeply personal. Coco did not storm her world. It entered quietly, offering steadiness when nerves trembled from overexposure. At first, it was occasional, a companion on nights when expectations felt too sharp, a whisper that said, "You do not have to carry every emotion at full volume." In this 1920s Paris history, that whisper is powerful precisely because it sounds compassionate. Listen to the subtle transformation. Her laughter grows brighter at first, then slightly distant. Her movements become fluid, almost dreamlike. She sings in a smoky cabaret voice, and the audience leans closer, captivated not only by sound but by presence. Yet when the music stops and the stage empties, the stillness returns more heavily than before. The post-war Paris atmosphere, with all its fragile resilience, waits patiently in the quiet corners of her room. There are nights when she tells herself it is only temporary, only until the exhibition ends, only until the next performance, only until the memory of a harsh word or an empty pocket fades. This is one of the most human layers of any Kiki de Montparnasse biography, the negotiation with oneself, the belief that control remains intact, that art will always anchor the drifting mind. And in art history sleep story retellings, this negotiation often hides behind romanticized glamour. But beneath glamour lies exhaustion. In the early hours when Montparnasse begins to quiet, she returns again to her small apartment. She removes her shoes slowly, feeling the ache in her feet. She unties ribbons from her hair. In the mirror, her eyes search for something stable, something not defined by audience or artist. The powder has softened the edges of her anxiety, yes, but it has also created a new tension, a subtle reliance on softness itself. In the broader narrative of underground Paris 1920s, this is how dependency grows, not through collapse, but through repetition. And yet, she is not a symbol. She is not merely a cautionary tale in the history of drug use in 1920s Europe. She is a woman navigating a city that celebrates intensity while rarely offering rest. In this sleep story history, we hold her story gently. We feel the loneliness beneath applause. We feel the tremor beneath laughter. And we begin to understand that the throne of Montparnasse, dazzling as it was, stood on fragile ground made of admiration, illusion, and the quiet longing to feel less alone. There comes a night when even the brightest room feels dim, not because the lamps have faded, but because the light no longer reaches the places inside that ache. In this quiet continuation of our 1920s Paris history, Kiki does not collapse dramatically. There is no scandal splashed across headlines. There is only the slow realization that the softness she once borrowed has begun to claim space of its own. The throne of Montparnasse still stands, but it wavers gently, like a stage set not built for permanence. In many art history sleep story retellings, the Bohemian life Paris of the 1920s is painted in bold strokes of liberation. Jazz, absinthe, painted canvases, late-night debates. Yet liberation without grounding can feel like floating too far from shore. For Kiki, the days blur more easily now. She wakes with a faint heaviness that no applause can erase. The folded paper that once appeared only on certain evenings begins to feel less optional, not demanded, not yet desperate, but expected. And expectation is a powerful current. The post-war Paris atmosphere still hums outside her window. Cafés remain full, artists remain restless, writers continue searching for the perfect sentence. But inside her small apartment, the air is quieter. She sits on the edge of her bed one afternoon, sunlight finally filtering through the curtains she forgot to close. The city is bright, indifferent, alive. She feels both part of it and slightly removed, as though observing her own life from a distance. In this more intimate layer of Kiki de Montparnasse biography, the emotional weight is subtle but steady. She does not want to disappear. She simply wants the sharpness to ease. Coco had once felt like a secret ally, a companion in rooms where expectation hovered like smoke. Now it begins to shape the rhythm of her evenings before they even begin. She tells herself it is necessary to maintain the image, to keep the laughter light and the posture confident. In the broader history of the heroin craze of 1920s Paris, such justifications were common. They were rarely dramatic. They sounded reasonable. In the quiet of underground Paris 1920s, dependency often dressed itself in logic. Listen to the way she moves through a studio now. There is still grace, still beauty, but also a faint hesitation when the room grows too silent. She senses the edge of memory waiting just beyond the curtain of sensation. The powder blurs that edge. It lowers the volume of doubt, but it also dims something else, an internal clarity that once allowed her to rest without assistance. This is not judgment, it is observation. It is the human element that makes 1920s Paris history more than dates and headlines. On certain nights, after the final song fades and the applause thins into scattered claps, she lingers alone on stage for a breath longer than necessary. The room smells of smoke and spilled champagne. Chairs are overturned slightly, evidence of celebration. She stands in that near-empty space and feels the echo of her own voice. It is in that echo that vulnerability surfaces most clearly. Without the audience, without the painter's gaze, who is she? A muse, a performer, a woman. All of these and something quieter beneath. In a Kiki de Montparnasse biography written with compassion, we do not reduce her to a symbol of excess. We see her as someone navigating Bohemian life Paris at a time when intensity was currency. The 1920s Paris history of addiction is not only about substances, it is about longing. Longing to remain luminous, longing to quiet inner storms, longing to belong to a city that demanded brilliance. Coco answered that longing softly at first. It promised continuity of glow, but glow sustained artificially can flicker unpredictably. As dawn approaches once more, she lies awake instead of sleeping. The sky over Montparnasse shifts from ink to pale gray. Birds begin their tentative morning calls. The post-war Paris atmosphere continues, indifferent and beautiful. She turns onto her side, eyes open, aware of the delicate line she now walks between illusion and identity. In this sleep story history, we close her day not with condemnation, but with tenderness. She is not merely the queen of Montparnasse. She is a human heart navigating fragile ground, building a throne out of admiration and smoke, hoping that the illusion will hold just long enough to feel steady.
Heroin did not simply appear in Paris. It arrived on night ships, carried through careful hands, guided by women no one thought to suspect. As dawn fades from Montparnasse and the quiet rooms of Muses and cafés recede into memory, our journey through 1920s Paris history turns outward, toward the invisible architecture that sustained the heroin craze. Beneath the poetry of Bohemian life and the glamour of shadow salons lay a quieter system, precise and patient. In the broader landscape of organized crime 1920s France, the movement of white powder was less chaos than choreography. Picture a harbor at night along the southern coast of France. The Mediterranean lies dark and almost glass-like, reflecting faint lantern light from anchored ships. Cargo is unloaded not in frantic secrecy, but in methodical rhythm. Crates shift from deck to dock with the same steady cadence used for wine or textiles. In the early chapters of drug smuggling history, concealment depended less on speed and more on blending into routine. Nothing appears urgent, nothing appears unusual. That is the elegance of procedure. Within this network, later whispered about as the White Widow system, certain couriers stood out precisely because they did not stand out at all. Widows dressed in black, women carrying baskets, seamstresses traveling between towns. In organized crime 1920s France, the underestimation of women became an operational advantage. A grieving widow boarding a night train attracted sympathy, not suspicion. A dressmaker transporting bolts of fabric raised no alarm. And inside those bolts, stitched with meticulous care, lay packages small enough to evade casual inspection, yet valuable enough to ripple through underground Paris 1920s. The logistics were deliberate. A shipment might begin far from Paris, processed in hidden laboratories where morphine derivatives were refined into heroin. From there, the powder moved in stages, never traveling the full distance with one individual. This compartmentalization is one of the more fascinating, boring history facts in drug smuggling history. Each courier knew only a fragment of the route. Each handler recognized only the contact before and after. The system relied not on bravado, but on fragmentation. Once in France, the cargo often paused in port cities, Marseille being one of the most significant nodes in organized crime 1920s France. Warehouses along the docks stored goods temporarily among legitimate merchandise. Ledgers were kept with quiet precision. Codes replaced explicit language. Silk might refer to something far finer than fabric. White thread might carry a meaning known only to a handful of trusted intermediaries. In this true crime sleep story, the intrigue lies not in gunfire or pursuit, but in paperwork, in routine, in repetition. From port to rail, from rail to carriage, the powder inched closer to Paris. Night trains hummed through the countryside, wheels striking rhythm against steel tracks. Inside a dim compartment, a woman in mourning attire sat upright, gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. A small parcel rested in her luggage, hidden beneath ordinary belongings. She gazed out at passing darkness, expression composed. The success of the journey depended on her calm. No sudden movements, no nervous glances. The power of the White Widow network was emotional discipline. By the time the cargo reached the capital, it no longer resembled contraband. It resembled commerce. Contacts in underground Paris 1920s received the parcels quietly. Distribution followed another pattern of division and subtlety. Small quantities passed to trusted intermediaries who supplied cafés, private apartments, and exclusive gatherings. The system was efficient precisely because it was understated. In the layered story of 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze was not merely the result of demand from artists and elites. It was supported by a logistical spine that functioned with almost bureaucratic calm. Organized crime 1920s France did not rely on spectacle. It relied on patience. And as we settle into this procedural chapter of our sleep story history, the rhythm of trains, the hush of dockyards, and the steady pulse of coded ledgers create a hypnotic backdrop, a reminder that beneath every cultural wave lies an unseen network moving quietly in the dark.
If we remain in the harbor a little longer, the hypnotic rhythm of the operation becomes clearer. In 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze was not sustained by chaos, but by repetition. Crates arrive, crates are logged, crates depart. The same gestures repeated night after night until they dissolve into normalcy. This is the quiet genius of organized crime, 1920s France. It did not rely on spectacle. It relied on predictability disguised as routine. Consider the paperwork, not dramatic forged passports or cinematic chases, but ledgers kept in tidy columns. In early drug smuggling history, the most effective concealment was bureaucratic. Quantities were adjusted subtly. Weights were rounded down. Shipments were divided into units so small they appeared insignificant.
A parcel that might draw attention if carried whole becomes invisible when scattered like grains across multiple routes. The method is almost mathematical, soothing in its precision. The so-called White Widow couriers moved within this framework with extraordinary composure. Their clothing was chosen deliberately, dark fabrics that did not invite inspection, gloves to avoid leaving traces, simple luggage with reinforced linings. In organized crime in 1920s France, suspicion often followed patterns of masculinity: dock workers, sailors, rough accents. The widows, by contrast, carried grief as camouflage: a bowed head, a quiet posture, a handkerchief clutched gently in hand. In the language of true crime sleep story, their greatest weapon was emotional restraint. A train departs Marseille under moonlight. Inside, compartments are softly lit, passengers murmuring or dozing. The widow sits near the window, gaze steady. Beneath her seat, sewn into a lining or concealed within the hollowed spine of a devotional book, rests a modest quantity of heroin. Not enough to raise alarm if discovered casually, yet when combined with parallel shipments traveling different routes, the total becomes substantial. This fragmentation was essential in organized crime in 1920s France. No single interruption could dismantle the whole. In the layered structure of drug smuggling history, redundancy is security. If one courier fell ill, another stepped in. If a shipment was delayed, the flow did not cease entirely. Like arteries branching from a central heart, the network distributed risk. The Corsican groups operating within this period understood that visibility invited collapse, so they remained quiet, almost invisible, blending commerce with concealment. By the time the cargo approached Paris, it passed through transitional hands: warehouse managers who knew only coded phrases, intermediaries who delivered parcels wrapped in plain paper to trusted recipients in underground Paris 1920s. The exchange might occur in the back room of a cafe before opening hours, or in the hallway of an apartment building while neighbors carried groceries. The gestures were ordinary: a nod, a handshake, a briefcase set down and lifted again. Nothing theatrical. There is something strangely calming in observing such process. In this true crime sleep story, the repetition of motion becomes almost meditative. Dock to rail, rail to carriage, carriage to cafe, cafe to private room. Each step mirrors the last, a chain of quiet compliance. Even the language used within the network avoided drama: white thread, imported silk, evening shipment. In organized crime in 1920s France, discretion was the true currency. Emotionally, what sustained this network was not cruelty, but detachment. The widows and intermediaries rarely encountered the end users in Montparnasse studios or shadow cafes. Distance preserved calm. It allowed the operation to remain procedural rather than personal. In 1920s Paris history, this separation between supply and consequence was a defining characteristic of the heroin craze. The powder moved through hands that never witnessed its final destination. And so the system continued, night after night, train after train, parcel after parcel. No gunfire, no alarms, only the quiet hum of infrastructure beneath the glamour of Bohemian life, Paris. The White Widow network did not seek recognition, it sought continuity. And in the soft repetition of its procedure lies the hypnotic core of this chapter, a reminder that beneath every cultural movement, beneath every artistic renaissance, there often runs a second story, written not in headlines, but in schedules, routes, and the steady breath of those who move unseen. If we follow the route,
all the way to its quiet conclusion, we arrive not at a dramatic exchange, but at a door closing softly somewhere in Paris. In the layered expanse of 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze depended on this final, understated moment. A parcel arrives. A signature is not written, only implied. A package changes hands without witness. The night continues as though nothing has shifted. And yet, beneath the surface of Bohemian life Paris, another thread has been woven into the fabric of the city. The White Widow network did not rush. Its strength lay in its calm continuity. In organized crime 1920s France, patience was protection. Couriers memorized schedules. Dock workers understood tides. Warehouse keepers maintained inventories with disciplined regularity. The rhythm itself became a shield. In drug smuggling history, repetition is both camouflage and confidence. When something happens the same way often enough, it begins to feel inevitable. Imagine a narrow stairwell in an apartment building near Montmartre. The walls are worn smooth from decades of hands gliding along the rail. A woman in dark attire ascends quietly, her steps measured, her breath even. Inside her modest handbag rests a small, carefully wrapped packet. She knocks once, then twice. The door opens only slightly. A brief exchange, no words beyond courtesy. The packet disappears into the dim interior. The door closes. The staircase remains unchanged, holding its silence. In this true crime sleep story, the drama lies not in confrontation, but in precision. What makes organized crime 1920s France so fascinating is its reliance on emotional discipline. Fear would draw attention, impatience would disrupt flow, so the network cultivated composure. The widows, the intermediaries, the dockhands, each performed their role as though it were mundane employment. That detachment allowed the heroin craze to circulate through underground Paris 1920s with astonishing steadiness. And yet, behind that detachment, one senses the quiet tension of those who understood the fragility of balance. In the broader drug smuggling history of Europe, networks that survived longest were those that mirrored legitimate commerce. They adopted its language, its schedules, its habits. In 1920s Paris history, the White Widow system reflected the very city it supplied. Paris was a place of routine brilliance, cafés opening at predictable hours, artists arriving at familiar tables, trains departing on time. The network simply inserted itself into those rhythms. Nothing felt out of place. There is a certain melancholy in recognizing how seamlessly the system operated. The powder that softened the edges of Montparnasse studios, that quieted the nerves of lost generation writers, that accompanied muses like Kiki through sleepless nights, traveled along rails and docks with almost bureaucratic serenity. In Bohemian life Paris, creativity and commerce intertwined. The heroin craze did not roar into existence, it flowed, gently but persistently, along channels built by careful hands. And so the White Widow network became less an anomaly and more an undercurrent. No single figure controlled it entirely, no single interruption could halt it completely. Its power lay in fragmentation, in shared silence. In this sleep story history, the hypnotic quality emerges from that steady movement. Harbor to warehouse, warehouse to rail, rail to stairwell, stairwell to studio. The same pattern repeated until it felt as natural as breathing. Emotionally, what lingers is not fear, but inevitability. The couriers likely saw themselves not as architects of decline, but as participants in trade. The intermediaries perhaps believed they were simply meeting demand. In organized crime 1920s France, moral lines blurred quietly, without speeches or declarations. And beneath the brilliance of 1920s Paris history, beneath jazz and canvases and smoky cafes, this procedural current moved on, unnoticed by most, essential to many. As we gently close this chapter, imagine once more the harbor at night. Lantern light trembles on water. A train whistle echoes softly across dark countryside. Somewhere in Paris, a package is unwrapped in a quiet room. The city continues its restless dream. The White Widow network fades back into shadow, not with collapse, but with continuity. And in that continuity lies the true hypnotic heart of this story, a reminder that systems built on patience can shape a city as profoundly as art, leaving traces that linger long after the footsteps have disappeared.
They believed it brought inspiration, but in truth, it brought a silence that slowly settled over unfinished canvases and unwritten pages. As the quiet machinery of the White Widow network fades into the background of our 1920s Paris history, we return to the studios, the cafes, and the fragile rooms where genius once flickered brightly. The heroin craze that drifted through Bohemian life Paris did not roar or shatter in dramatic collapse. It softened edges, blurred vision, and over time it dimmed the very fire it promised to ignite. In the early days, the connection between surrealism and drugs felt almost romanticized. The idea that altered perception could unlock hidden corridors of the mind fascinated artists searching for new language. In art history documentary sleep retellings, we often linger on the daring experiments of the avant-garde, on dreams translated into paint, on poetry that twisted logic into luminous abstraction. Yet beneath that creative rebellion was a delicate nervous system, human and finite. Consider a studio in Montparnasse late at night. A half-finished canvas leans against a wall. The colors are bold but unresolved, shapes hovering in uncertainty. The painter sits before it, brush resting between fingers that tremble ever so slightly. At first, the powder had seemed to sharpen vision, to quiet doubt, to smooth the inner critic that whispers too loudly. In the wider 1920s Paris history, this belief spread quietly among certain circles. If art required intensity, then anything that amplified intensity must be a tool. But intensity sustained artificially behaves differently. It peaks and then flattens. It excites and then exhausts. In the evolving relationship between surrealism and drugs, inspiration began to blur into dependency. The hallucinations that once felt like gateways to deeper truth slowly became distortions that were harder to control. Colors no longer carried clarity, they carried confusion. Lines wavered, concepts drifted, and where there had once been disciplined experimentation, there emerged a haze that dulled rather than expanded perception. In tragic artist history, the pattern is heartbreakingly consistent. A brilliant mind seeks expansion. A substance promises access. For a brief season, creativity appears heightened. Then the equilibrium shifts. In underground Paris 1920s, this shift was rarely public. It happened in private studios, in letters never sent, in journals where entries grew shorter and more fragmented. The powder did not steal talent overnight. It eroded stamina. It narrowed focus. It replaced sustained effort with fleeting bursts of sensation. There is a particular sorrow in unfinished work, a manuscript abandoned mid-chapter, a sculpture left rough and incomplete. In art history documentary sleep narratives, we sometimes romanticize these fragments as mysteries. But behind each fragment was often fatigue. The body, reliant now on chemical steadiness, struggled to endure long hours of disciplined creation. The mind, once sharp and restless, found it harder to remain with a single idea without drifting toward the promise of softness.
In this chapter of 1920s Paris history, we do not accuse or dramatize, we observe gently. The heroin craze did not target artists specifically, but artists with their heightened sensitivity felt its shifts more acutely. Surrealism and drugs became entwined not because destruction was desired, but because transcendence was. The tragedy of genius lies not in arrogance, but in vulnerability. Those who feel deeply also risk falling deeply. And so the studios grew quieter, not empty, but subdued. Conversations in cafes retained brilliance, yet there was an undercurrent of fatigue in certain voices. The post-war Paris atmosphere had already thinned emotional resilience. Now, compounded by dependency, the burden grew heavier. In sleep story history, we sit beside that burden calmly. We acknowledge the sadness without sharp edges. We recognize that behind every legend in tragic artists' history, there was a human being who once believed that inspiration could be summoned at will. As we settle into this first part of hallucinations and the fall, imagine the brush resting longer between strokes, the typewriter keys pressed less frequently. The powder that promised illumination begins to cast a softer, more permanent shadow. And in that shadow, genius does not explode, it simply grows tired.
If we remain inside that quiet studio a little longer, we begin to see that the fall of art is rarely sudden. In 1920s Paris history, decline did not arrive with a single catastrophic gesture. It arrived as delay, the postponed exhibition, a missed meeting with a publisher, a canvas turned toward the wall because it felt too difficult to finish. The heroin craze that had once whispered promises of expanded vision now softened ambition itself. And softness, when it lingers too long, can quietly replace discipline. In the early conversations around surrealism and drugs, there was genuine curiosity. Could altered perception reveal hidden architecture within the subconscious? Could hallucination become a legitimate tool of exploration? In art history documentary Sleep Reflections, we often trace how dreams influenced visual language, how distortion birthed innovation. Yet hallucination without grounding does not sustain craft. It overwhelms structure. It loosens form until even intention dissolves. Picture a writer seated at a small wooden desk in Montparnasse. The typewriter waits. The page is clean, patient, expectant. In the beginning, the powder seemed to loosen language, to allow sentences to spill forward without resistance. Words flowed more freely, metaphors felt daring. But gradually, flow became fragmentation. Paragraphs began without conclusion. Characters appeared without development. The discipline required to revise, to endure doubt, to sit through frustration weakened. In tragic artist history, this erosion is subtle yet devastating. The post-war Paris atmosphere had already thinned emotional reserves. Many of these artists belonged to the lost generation, carrying invisible weight beneath their creativity. When heroin entered their lives, it did not create sorrow from nothing. It offered temporary anesthesia to an already fragile nervous system. And in that anesthesia, the sharp tension that often fuels sustained creation began to fade. Art demands friction. It demands the willingness to remain with discomfort long enough to shape it. Dependency interrupts that endurance. In underground Paris 1920s, conversations about decline were whispered rather than declared. A painter's absence from a gathering, a manuscript rumored to be stalled, a gallery owner waiting patiently for promised work that never arrived. The tragedy of genius is rarely theatrical. It is administrative. It is the quiet accumulation of unfinished tasks. In this sleep story history, The melancholy lies in those empty spaces between intention and completion. Surrealism and drugs became intertwined in myth, but myth simplifies reality. The truth was more complicated and more human. Hallucination could inspire images, yes, but sustained mastery required repetition, correction, and sober reflection. As the heroin craze deepened, the balance tipped. Nights grew longer, mornings later. Energy surged briefly and then receded more sharply. The studio lights stayed on, yet fewer canvases reached resolution. There is a particular ache in imagining talent aware of its own diminishing momentum. The painter senses that something has shifted but cannot name it fully. The writer rereads pages and feels distance from their own voice. In art history documentary sleep retellings, we might speak gently of periods of difficulty, but beneath that phrase often lived dependency's quiet gravity. In 1920s Paris history, not every artist fell, but enough struggled that the atmosphere itself carried fatigue. And yet, even within decline, there remains dignity. These were not caricatures undone overnight. They were individuals navigating longing, trauma, expectation, and the seductive promise of relief. In tragic artist history, the most heartbreaking element is not the existence of substances, but the hope placed upon them, the belief that inspiration could be summoned without cost. As we move deeper into hallucinations and the fall, imagine a studio at dawn. The sky lightens gently beyond tall windows. A canvas stands half complete, its colors luminous yet unresolved. The artist sits before it, eyes heavy, heart conflicted. The powder no longer feels like liberation, it feels like habit. And habit, when entwined with identity, becomes difficult to untangle. The fall of art, then, is not destruction. It is the slow quieting of a once burning intensity, replaced by something softer, dimmer, and harder to reverse.
There is a particular stillness that follows prolonged intensity. In the final stretch of this chapter in our 1920s Paris history, the fall does not arrive with shattered glass or public disgrace. It arrives with rooms that grow quieter than they once were. Studios that remain lit yet feel less alive. Conversations that circle the same ideas without moving forward. The heroin craze, which once promised illumination, leaves behind a softer but heavier silence. In mythology surrounding surrealism and drugs, altered perception is often framed as a doorway. But doorways lead somewhere, and not every path beyond them sustains the traveler. In this art history documentary sleep reflection, we begin to see how hallucination, when repeated and chemically summoned, loses its mystery. What once felt like revelation becomes routine. What once startled the imagination begins to dull it. The mind, accustomed to artificial expansion, struggles to generate depth unaided. Picture again the half-finished canvas leaning against a wall in Montparnasse. Dust settles along its lower edge. The colors remain vibrant, but the energy behind them has thinned. The painter stands before it, searching for the earlier spark. In tragic artist history, this moment is rarely described in detail. It is easier to celebrate the masterpieces than to linger on the works that almost were. Yet the almost carries its own quiet weight. For writers, the fall often feels even more intimate. A manuscript rests in a drawer, its first chapters brimming with urgency, its final pages unwritten. The typewriter keys, once struck with impatience, now gather silence.
In underground Paris 1920s, the cafés still hum, but certain seats remain empty longer. Friends speak in lowered tones about health, about exhaustion, about needing time. The language of decline is gentle. It avoids accusation. It leans toward acceptance. The tragedy of genius is not that brilliance disappears entirely. It is that it becomes intermittent. In 1920s Paris history, many artists continued to produce, but the consistency that once defined them faltered. Surrealism and drugs did not erase talent, they complicated it. They introduced volatility where discipline had once reigned. And volatility, while dramatic, is difficult to sustain across years of work. Emotionally, what lingers most is not scandal, but melancholy. The post-war Paris atmosphere had already stretched resilience thin. The heroin craze layered softness over that fragility, offering relief that came with cost. In art history documentary sleep narratives, we speak softly of decline, yet beneath that word lies grief, not only for what was created, but for what might have been. There is something profoundly human about reaching for transcendence and finding instead limitation. The artists of Montparnasse did not intend to silence their own brushes or stall their own sentences. They sought intensity, clarity, escape from doubt, and for a time the powder seemed to answer. But genius, like any living force, requires nourishment, rest, and clarity of mind. Dependency interrupts that balance. As this chapter settles into its final cadence, imagine dawn once more over Paris. The Seine reflects pale light. Studios stand with windows slightly ajar. Somewhere, a canvas remains unfinished. Somewhere else, a notebook closes mid-thought. The fall is not thunderous, it is gradual, like a candle burning lower than expected. In this sleep story history, we do not condemn these figures. We sit beside their unfinished work with quiet compassion. The heroin craze of 1920s Paris left behind more than headlines. It left behind fragments, sketches without completion, poems without final lines, careers that shimmered brightly and then dimmed. And yet, even within this tragedy of genius, there remains dignity. For every fading flame, there was once a powerful blaze. And in remembering both the light and the shadow, we understand that the fall of art was not merely a collapse, it was a slow surrender to softness, a quiet closing of doors that had once opened onto extraordinary possibility. Parisian police of that era did not rely on sirens, they relied on patience. And the arrests unfolded as quietly as a passing breeze along the Seine. As the fading echoes of unfinished canvases linger in our 1920s Paris history, another presence begins to move through the city. It does not announce itself with flashing lights or raised voices. It moves in shadow, in observation, in ink pressed carefully onto paper. In the deeper layers of Paris police history, enforcement was less spectacle and more endurance. By the mid-1920s, the heroin craze had grown too visible to ignore, not in the loud way of riots or public collapse, but in subtle patterns that 1920s law enforcement began to notice. Certain cafés drew the same late-night visitors. Certain addresses appeared repeatedly in quiet reports. Certain dock shipments seemed too frequent, too discreet. In calm history narration, the story of enforcement unfolds not as confrontation, but as accumulation. Imagine a narrow Parisian street under steady rain. An officer stands beneath the awning of a closed shop, coat collar turned upward. He is not chasing anyone, he is waiting.
In Parisian police history, surveillance was often mundane and patient. Hours spent observing a single doorway, days tracking the rhythm of a known intermediary, weeks noting which carriage stopped where and for how long. The work was repetitive, almost hypnotic. In that repetition lay its strength. The noir atmosphere of underground Paris 1920s becomes more pronounced here, not because of violence, but because of contrast. Warm light spills from a Montparnasse café, laughter drifting into the damp night. Across the street, in shadow, a detective writes in a small notebook, names, times, descriptions. In 1920s law enforcement, documentation was power. Every detail mattered. The color of a scarf, the hour a light extinguished, the direction a figure walked when leaving a building. Unlike cinematic raids of later decades, these early efforts were deliberate and restrained. In calm history narration, we see how Paris police history leaned on procedure. When enough observations aligned, a quiet warrant followed. Officers would approach not with urgency, but with inevitability. A knock at dawn, a polite but firm request to step outside. The heroin craze, once flowing smoothly through the White Widow network, began to encounter friction. Emotionally, this chapter carries a different tone. There is less melancholy and more quiet resolve. The post-war Paris atmosphere had tolerated fragility in artists and indulgence in elites, but as dependency deepened and public health concerns rose, the city's tolerance thinned. 1920s law enforcement did not frame its work as moral crusade, it framed it as order, as restoration. In Paris police history, order was rarely loud, it was methodical. Picture an apartment interior at dawn, curtains half drawn, a small silver box resting on a bedside table. The knock at the door is steady, unhurried. When it opens, there is no dramatic struggle, only recognition. In underground Paris 1920s, many who were detained understood that the era of invisibility was closing. The silent raids did not explode through neighborhoods, they dissolved them slowly. Cafés that once buzzed into early morning began to close earlier. Certain back rooms grew quieter. Patrons shifted elsewhere, uncertain. In 1920s Paris history, enforcement did not erase the heroin craze overnight, but it altered its texture. The city felt watched, not aggressively, but persistently. And persistence, like the patient brushstroke of an artist, reshapes the canvas over time. As we settle into this first movement of the silent raids, imagine rain continuing to fall on cobblestones. An officer closes his notebook and steps into the mist. The city remains beautiful, luminous, and tired, but beneath its elegance, a steady current of observation now flows. Not loud, not hurried, just present. And in that presence, the balance of Paris begins to shift.
If we remain in that rain-washed street a little longer, we begin to understand that the true force of 1920s law enforcement was not speed, but endurance. In our unfolding 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze did not collapse under a single dramatic operation. It thinned under pressure that never quite lifted. Paris police history reveals something almost meditative about this approach. Surveillance was not about catching a moment of chaos, it was about observing patterns until they revealed themselves. Across weeks and sometimes months, officers returned to the same corners of Montparnasse and Pigalle. They learned the cadence of footsteps on cobblestones, the way certain lamps flickered before extinguishing. the precise hour a back door would open to admit a familiar silhouette. In calm history narration, these details may seem ordinary, but in the world of underground Paris 1920s, repetition carried meaning. Patterns formed invisible maps. Imagine a detective seated in a small office near the Préfecture de Police. On his desk lie notebooks filled with neat handwriting, dates, addresses, associations. No dramatic exclamation marks, just steady documentation. In Paris police history, this was the architecture of enforcement. The heroin craze, once fluid and confident, began to feel observed from multiple angles, not confronted, but traced. The noir atmosphere deepens not through violence, but through contrast. Inside a cafe, jazz murmurs softly. Smoke coils upward, blurring faces into anonymity. Outside, beneath a street lamp halo, two officers stand in quiet conversation. Their voices are low, almost courteous. In 1920s law enforcement, discretion was a strategic choice. Loud action risked scattering networks too quickly. Patience allowed them to map the system more completely. Emotionally, this slow tightening carried its own tension. Those involved in the heroin trade sensed change long before arrests multiplied. A familiar face missing from a gathering, a courier delayed at the docks, a shipment inspected more thoroughly than usual. In underground Paris 1920s, suspicion traveled as softly as rumor. The city's elegance remained intact, but beneath it, awareness spread. Paris police history from this era often emphasizes reform and professionalization. After the upheavals of war, administrative discipline grew more refined. Records were centralized, communication between districts improved. In calm history narration, we see how infrastructure, not aggression, reshaped outcomes. The heroin craze encountered not fury, but coordination. And coordination, applied steadily, alters trajectories without spectacle. Picture a sequence of early morning visits across different neighborhoods. Doors knocked upon gently but firmly, papers presented, individuals escorted without raised voices. There is something profoundly unsettling about quiet authority. It does not require force to assert itself. It simply appears, consistent and prepared. In 1920s Paris history, the silent raids signaled that invisibility was no longer guaranteed. Cafés, once rumored to host discreet exchanges, began to lose their late-night clientele. Back rooms felt colder, less secure. The White Widow network, so reliant on predictability, now faced uncertainty. In 1920s law enforcement, unpredictability became a subtle weapon. Routes once considered safe were no longer unquestioned. Habits had to change, and change disrupts flow. As we move toward the final part of this chapter, imagine the city under a pale gray dawn. The rain has stopped. Streets glisten softly. An officer closes a file and places it into a cabinet already half full. The work continues tomorrow and the day after. In this calm history narration, enforcement is not heroic spectacle. It is persistence, a slow, patient recalibration of balance in a city that had drifted too far into shadow.
By the time we reach the final movement of the silent raids, the city itself feels altered, though nothing dramatic has occurred in public squares. In this closing arc of our 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze does not end with a headline or a single decisive sweep. It recedes gradually, like fog lifting from the Seine at dawn. Paris police history reminds us that transformation is often administrative rather than explosive. The city shifts not through noise, but through accumulated restraint. In the weeks following successive quiet arrests, something subtle changes in the atmosphere of Montparnasse and Pigalle. The cafés still open, the lamps still glow amber against the night, but the energy feels thinner. In underground Paris 1920s, confidence had once flowed easily between dock, stairwell, and studio. Now hesitation enters the rhythm. A glance held a second too long, a meeting postponed, a package rerouted. In 1920s law enforcement, this was the desired effect, not spectacle, but disruption of certainty. Imagine a detective once more beneath a street lamp, hat brim shadowing his eyes. He no longer needs to watch as long. The patterns have shifted. Addresses that once required daily attention now stand quiet. In calm history narration, we recognize how endurance yields results invisible to casual observers. The heroin craze of 1920s Paris did not evaporate, but its routes became fragmented, its cohesion weakened, and cohesion, once lost, is difficult to rebuild. There is a particular noir beauty in these final days of quiet pressure. No gunshots echo, no sirens pierce the night. Instead, there is paperwork signed with measured strokes, files transferred between offices, conversations held in low tones over wooden desks worn smooth by decades of administrative labor. In Paris police history, the slow machinery of bureaucracy proved as influential as any dramatic confrontation. Emotionally, this stage carries a muted complexity. For some, relief settles in gently. Families notice loved ones returning home earlier. Cafe owners adjust to calmer evenings. For others, particularly those entwined in the trade, anxiety replaces confidence. In 1920s Paris history, every shift carries dual impact. Order restored for some feels like opportunity narrowed for others. Calm history narration allows space for both perspectives without judgment. The most profound change, however, lies in perception. The sense of invisibility that once shielded the heroin networks dissolves. In underground Paris 1920s, secrecy had felt permanent, but as 1920s law enforcement demonstrated consistent presence, that illusion faded. Paris police history from this era illustrates how authority, when exercised steadily rather than theatrically, reshapes behavior through awareness alone. Imagine the same narrow stairwell we visited earlier in this series. It remains intact, its walls worn smooth, yet fewer footsteps climb it at midnight. The door at the top opens less frequently. The silence now is different from the silence of secrecy. It is the silence of caution. In this sleep story history, we feel the city exhale slowly, not in triumph, but in recalibration. As dawn stretches across Paris once more, the Seine reflects pale light and the cobblestones dry after rain. The cafes continue, artists still gather, life resumes its layered complexity. But beneath the elegance, a lesson lingers. The heroin craze of 1920s Paris did not vanish because of spectacle. It waned because patience met patience. One system built on repetition encountered another built on endurance. And so we close Chapter 7, not with applause, but with quiet understanding. The silent raids were not cinematic heroics. They were the steady hum of a city correcting its course. In this calm history narration, we leave Paris suspended between shadow and light, no longer fully consumed by the haze of powder.
yet forever marked by the chapter it lived through. The streets remain beautiful, the lamps still glow, and somewhere in the distance, footsteps echo softly, reminding us that history, like enforcement, often moves most powerfully when it moves without noise.
As the silent raids settle into memory, and the last of the fog thins along the Seine, a different kind of morning begins to arrive. When the 20s closed, the dream closed with them. Paris woke with a dull headache and a world already shifting beneath its feet. In this final arc of our 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze no longer moves through stairwells or cafe back rooms. It lingers instead as a residue, like perfume left in an empty room after the guests have gone home. The end of the Roaring Twenties was not marked by a single dramatic curtain fall. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The jazz softened, the parties shortened, the laughter carried a different tone. In underground Paris 1920s, the intensity that once defined Montparnasse began to cool. Artists aged, writers reconsidered their ambitions, patrons tightened their spending as economic tremors rippled across Europe. The heroin craze, once whispered as fashion, now felt dated, even dangerous. In 1930s Paris history, a heavier awareness entered the city. The global economy faltered, political tensions gathered like distant thunder. The fragile brilliance of the 20s seemed suddenly fragile indeed. In sleep meditation history, transitions like these feel almost like breathing out after holding the breath too long. The city, exhausted by indulgence and experimentation, began to steady itself. Imagine early morning light touching the facades of Montmartre. Shopkeepers lift their shutters, bakers prepare bread before sunrise. The cafés open not for wild revelry, but for routine conversation. In calm reflection, we sense that Paris is not the same city it was in 1925. It is quieter, not defeated, but aware. The heroin craze, which once shimmered at the edges of glamour, now recedes into anecdote, into cautionary memory. There is something deeply human about awakening after excess, the dull ache behind the eyes, the slow recognition that choices leave traces. In the end of the Roaring Twenties, Paris did not condemn itself, it adjusted. In 1930s Paris history, reform and restraint intertwined. Law enforcement remained present, public health discourse matured, conversations shifted from curiosity to consequence. Emotionally, this chapter carries neither despair nor triumph. It carries acceptance. In sleep meditation history, acceptance is a gentle exhale. The city does not erase what happened, it absorbs it. The unfinished canvases remain part of art history. The quiet arrests remain part of Paris police history. The lost nights remain part of Bohemian life Paris, but they no longer dominate its rhythm. Stand now along the Seine at twilight as the decade turns. The water reflects a cooler sky. The music from nearby cafes is softer, more restrained. There is a sense that Paris has learned something difficult but necessary. In 1930s Paris history, the shadow of another war begins to stretch faintly across Europe. Compared to what is coming, the heroin craze seems almost like a fever dream from youth. And yet, even fever dreams leave wisdom. The end of the Roaring Twenties teaches that intensity without balance burns quickly, that glamour without grounding fades, that creativity sustained requires clarity as much as passion.
In this sleep meditation history, we allow these reflections to drift through the mind without judgment. Paris awakes not with self-reproach, but with sober awareness. The fog has lifted. The streets remain. The city, like a living being, adjusts its posture and prepares for what lies ahead.
If we remain a little longer in that softened twilight, we begin to sense that awakening is not a sudden jolt, but a gradual realignment. In this closing reflection of our 1920s Paris history, the heroin craze no longer feels central. It becomes a chapter folded gently into the broader narrative of a city that has survived revolutions, wars, brilliance, and folly. The end of the Roaring Twenties does not erase what came before, it reframes it. In 1930s Paris history, the tone shifts almost imperceptibly. Economic uncertainty tightens budgets. Political debates grow more serious. Conversations in cafes linger on newspapers rather than manifestos of art. The laughter that once filled Montparnasse with restless ambition now carries maturity. The heroin craze, once woven into underground Paris 1920s, fades into cautionary memory, spoken of in lower voices and with less glamour. There is a quiet dignity in collective realization. In sleep meditation history, dignity is not dramatic, it is steady. Paris does not collapse under regret. It absorbs its excesses as lessons. The unfinished canvases of tragic artist history remain in galleries and archives. The quiet police files of Paris police history rest in cabinets. The whispered stories of silver boxes and shadow cafes linger only as echoes. The city integrates them without being defined by them. Imagine walking along the Seine in the early 1930s. The air feels cooler, clearer. The neon glow of wild nights has softened into lamplight that feels almost contemplative. In this calm history narration, we sense a stoic undercurrent. What has passed cannot be undone. What has been learned can guide what comes next. The city, like an individual after a long season of intensity, chooses steadiness. The shadow of another global conflict slowly gathers beyond the horizon. Compared to that looming weight, the heroin craze of 1920s Paris begins to seem like a fever that broke just in time. In 1930s Paris history, survival becomes a more pressing theme than indulgence. Creativity does not vanish, but it adapts. It becomes quieter, more reflective, sometimes even restrained. Emotionally, this ending invites softness rather than sorrow. In sleep meditation history, we allow the mind to settle. Paris waking up is not a moral reckoning, it is a return to balance. The city that once drifted through fog now stands in clearer light. The cafes remain, the artists remain. The river continues its patient flow, but the rhythm has changed. If we look back across the chapters of this story, we see a pattern familiar to human experience. Intensity rises, curiosity expands, boundaries blur, then awareness returns. The end of the Roaring Twenties marks not only a historical shift, but a psychological one. A recognition that brilliance without grounding cannot sustain itself indefinitely.
that even the most luminous eras must yield to quieter seasons. And so, as this sleep meditation history gently closes, imagine Paris at night once more, but this time without haze. The sky above Montmartre is clear. The cobblestones reflect lamplight without distortion. Somewhere, a studio window glows softly, not with frantic urgency, but with patient focus. The Heroin Craze has retreated into the margins of 1920s Paris history. The city breathes steadily. Allow that steady breathing to become your own. Let the rhythm of the Seine mirror your inhale and exhale. History, like sleep, moves in cycles: excess and correction, shadow and clarity. Paris wakes up not in panic, but in acceptance. And in that acceptance lies peace. The story does not end with collapse or spectacle. It ends with quiet continuity. A city that has learned, adjusted, and now rests beneath a calmer sky, preparing for whatever dawn may bring.